Now, the U.S. government shutdown is impacting people who work in some of the country's most critical industries, like food and agriculture. Farmers are thrust into uncertainty now, while millions of families are at risk of losing food stamps. This comes on top of other tumult in the sector caused by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s new health policies, the ongoing tariff war, and climate change. Chef Sam Kass worked in the Obama White House as a senior policy advisor on nutrition, and he spoke to Michelle Martin about all of this and his new book, The Last Supper.
Thanks, Bianna. Sam Kass, thanks so much for talking with us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Just to remind people, you were a longtime chef for the Obama family, a senior advisor for nutrition policy in the Obama administration, executive director of Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign, which is all about kind of healthy eating, fitness, especially aimed at kids. You've got a new book out, The Last Supper, How to Overcome the Coming Food Crisis. As briefly as you can, what's the coming food crisis?
Food and agriculture is on the front lines of climate change. And, we're seeing issues play out around the world and certainly throughout the country in terms of the impact that climate is having on our food system and our ability to feed it, ourselves. Things like coffee prices are up this year because of drought. Last year, chocolate prices were up 200%. We've seen collapses of Georgia peaches over the last few years, or snow crab fisheries in the Pacific Northwest that have been closed because of complete wipeout of those crab populations. Our very way of life is really under threat. And I think a lot of times we talk about it like 1.5 degrees or climate change. Nobody even really knows what the implications of that is. But when you start to get down into the role of food and the impact this is having on food, you start to understand it's really our way of life that we're trying to fight for. And so we have a lot of work to do.
If you were to stop 10 people on the street, do you think that they would know that there's a problem, that they would say something not quite right, or not?
I think right now, sadly, the answer is no. I think we've done a really bad job at trying to connect these issues around climate change and the environment to people's lives and help them understand why they have a real stake in solving these challenges. Like as a kid from Chicago, 1.5 degrees warmer sounds good. In fact, I would probably advocate for let's make it 5 degrees warmer. I don't think we have connected these issues to the realities that people are going to start to feel them. And we have a lot of work to do there. And that's especially true when we understand that, food and agriculture is the number 2 driver of emissions globally. It's number 1 driver of biodiversity loss and deforestation. It's the number 1 use of fresh water, on the planet. So what we're eating is actually driving a huge amount of the problems that we face, and also sort of on the front lines of the impact. And so, yes, we have a lot of work to do to get, harness the power of eaters to start pointing our system in a better direction.
One of the things I'm curious about, though, is people who produce food directly, farmers, ranchers, people who work in the agriculture space, people who produce the food.
Yeah,
they're on the front lines. So what I'm curious about is these are also some of President Trump's strongest constituencies. How do you understand that?
There's some deep inherent contradictions in terms of to the interest of producers around this country. One that, is hard to fully rationalize, if I'm honest. I think there's a real libertarian, independent, tradition in rural America and in agriculture. I think the GOP has captured that and politicized a lot of these issues as sort of liberal elite issues. So when you talk to growers around climate change, they think you're talking out of the side of your head and think that you're kind of crazy. But they're definitely concerned about the changing weather, and a lot of it has to do with language. And right now, growers are being absolutely battered by not only climate change, but also tariff policy, the healthcare policy and loss of, rural hospitals. I think the support is being put to the test in a very real way. You're going to see a big bailout coming from the administration because that's how serious farmers are hurting, particularly loss of foreign markets. China's not buying any soybeans. It was our biggest export market by far. They're now moving to Brazil because of the tariff policy of this administration. So I think, and we can't forget, what's happening on the immigration front. I mean, I don't think most producers in this country expected to see ICE agents running through their fields chasing after people who are just doing some of the hardest work there is, day in and day out. And for many people, have been working for some of these farmers for 20 years. So I think some of that support is starting to crack a bit, but it's going to take more pain, I think, to really move that voting bloc in a different direction. But right now, the policy of this administration fly in the face of what's best for American agriculture.
Talk a little bit more about what you're concerned about. What are some of the issues around climate and food that keep you up at night, frankly?
Yeah, well, right now, the complete pullback of all climate-related policies in the United States should alarm us all. And it's down to like detailed stuff like weather reporting, basic, reporting on what's happening, what's changing, for growers from a weather perspective, let alone policies in place to help set our system for success. We've had a system that's been built over the last 10,000 years, even the last 1,000 years have been the most stable climate that scientists can observe in the historical record. We've just gotten really lucky. And we've had abundant natural resources, namely abundant soil and an endless supply of fresh water and cheap energy. And we're now having to grow food in an increasingly volatile climate with dwindling soil and not enough water. We just don't have a system that's set up to deal with that volatility. We have a lot of work to do to start embedding much more diversity into what we're growing and how we're growing it to deal with those shocks that we're going to, absolutely face increasingly year over year. We just haven't done that at all. So not only are we going to exacerbate the problem dramatically by pulling out of, the Paris Accords, by gutting every climate-related policy that this, the United States government has in place, we're just also not investing in the future of resiliency in our food system, and that should scare us all. I mean, this is really foundational to our way of life, to our ability to pass down to the next generation the basic standard of living that we have, and that's under threat. I'll also just say, I'm worried about all the things that I love to eat every day, but when you start to look at global commodities like rice, that 3.5 billion people depend on, and climate change is going to start having a real negative impact on yields there, or wheat, these core commodities that basically feed the world, then you're talking about major food insecurity events globally, major political instability as a result, forced migrations. And so from a national security standpoint and from a U.S. position around the world, the pressure is going to only grow dramatically on our ability to maintain our way of life. And that's something that we just have to take serious. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is just our ability to maintain, the America that we know and love. And that's what we should be focused on across the board.
So that's kind of a high level, kind of grass tops conversation. Could you bring it down to maybe the grassroots? Is there a way that people might be seeing this in their own lives, even if they're not sure that that's what they're seeing in foods that people like to eat, every day here? Yeah. Could you kind of make it more real if people just haven't thought about it very much?
First of all, food prices are just steadily are increasing and will continue to increase. And I think that's going to be the first thing that we start to see. Foods that we've taken for granted, like a cup of coffee in the morning, which, for me, I can't survive without a couple cups, if not more, every day, are going to start to, increase in price meaningfully. And so many of the foods that we love are simply not going to be available to most people. Like, for example, last year, in Spain, wine producers, coffee producers had to lay off basically all of their workers, the big ones, because they had no grapes to harvest. And you're seeing, growers in Champagne having to buy land in England because they don't think they're going to be able to produce, champagne in Champagne. These kind of disruptions are going to happen all over the country and all over the world. So foods that we've taken for granted, like like salmon on the West Coast, those fisheries are all closed because there's just no salmon. There's been heat waves happening in our oceans that are decimating these natural ecosystems. In fact, just yesterday, I think, a couple days ago, a landmark report came out saying we passed the first global tipping point around coral reefs. 80% of coral reefs have been infected by bleaching. Basically, these reefs are dying, and because of temperature warming. This maintains life, and food for over 1 billion people on the planet.
What's interesting about your book is that you write about your initial reluctance, to work with big companies like Walmart and McDonald's. But you say that you ultimately found these collaborations fruitful, that they have business reasons. This is not a nice to do. This is a business imperative for some of these companies. So that makes me wonder whether there's a similar opportunity for this so-called Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA movement that has become very visible and present in the Trump administration and in the Republican Party broadly. I mean, the Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., obviously being the sort of the chief spokesman and sort of avatar, of that movement. I mean, just it has to be said for people who perhaps have not followed this as closely, is that many people sort of in traditional, science and public health are deeply concerned about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and this movement more broadly. They find it, anti-intellectual, completely divorced from reality, divorced from scientific fact, rife with misinformation. But having said that, given your experience, do you see any synergy there? Do you see any opportunity? I don't know how else you'd sort of put in any sort of overlap of interest that might be fruitful and productive?
Yeah, I will say I held out some hope in the beginning. I think his narrative and critique of what's wrong holds a lot of truth. It's a critique that we were laying out when we were in the White House, and one that has been uttered many times over the last few decades. And I think that gave a lot of people, including a lot of friends of mine who care a lot about these issues, supporting a president they otherwise wouldn't, because they believe that this administration could do a lot on the issue. And it was shocking but encouraging to me to see members of the Republican Party start saying that the health is an issue and we should do something about it, given that they fought us tooth and nail on literally everything we tried to do when we were in the White House. So that, gave me some hope. I will say, unfortunately, those voices that you referenced, I've come to absolutely agree with. I think RFK is the greatest threat to public health this country's ever faced. His absolute lack of integrity, of using of science, and of focusing on the issues that matter. On the food side, I mean, food dyes, which has been the main thing they focus on, literally is irrelevant. I mean, I'm not a champion of food dyes. I'm happy to get them out of our food, but Fruit Loops, with or without dyes, are still not something we should be feeding our kids. And it just literally has no outcomes in health. The other main thing, seed oils, is just a joke. It literally flies in the face of every major scientific review of the issue. And he's promoting fast food, cheeseburgers and French fries fried in beef tallow, which is just like pure insanity. And that's sort of like the facade. And really what's going on is an attempt to undermine our vaccine policy, and saying insane statements like, circumcision and Tylenol use is leading to autism. I mean, this is just straight lunacy. And I think we should all be deeply alarmed.
So wheel it around. What are you encouraged by? Is there anything that you're encouraged by when it comes to health, food, and climate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the exciting thing that gets me out of bed every day with some optimism, even in the, in what I would say is a difficult time in this space, is I think food and agricultural systems are really the only system on planet Earth that can actually solve or mitigate the worst of climate change in the time that the science says we have. A huge percentage of the carbon that is now in our atmosphere used to be in our soils. And we have, through the right practices and new technologies, the ability to bring a lot of that carbon back into our soils, which improves soil health, improves our yields. And we can start paying growers to farm in a better way and solve this incredibly existential problem we face.
You mean using farms for carbon capture?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I'm working with a number of companies and different technologies that can do just that, and at massive scale, that could really move the needle. We get caught up in a lot of, sexy sounding technologies like direct air capture that sucks carbon out of the air, but none of that is scalable in time. It's way too expensive. You just can't have a big enough impact. There's 1 billion people growing food around the world. If you start to incentivize them and harness them to farm in a way that's actually pulling that carbon back into the soil, we can totally bend the global emissions curve, grow food in a more sustainable way, make farming much more profitable for producers who are just always on the edge, especially right now. And that's all possible. We have the tools. They're making so much progress. We just need more cultural support for it, meaning like eaters have to start supporting it. We need politicians to believe in science and start enacting policies that help push these practices in a different direction, in agriculture. But we have a huge opportunity before us to actually use this system that is right now driving the problem to actually solve the problem. And I couldn't believe that, more firmly. The kind of doomsday scenarios that you hear people saying are totally avoidable if we take decisive action now.
So what decisive action should people take? I mean, two aspects to this question. First of all, one of the things that you do with the book is make it personal. Like if you like this, if you like coffee as you do, if you like chocolate as I do, as I think all decent people do, what should you do? What should you do?
Well, on the personal front, and I will say that, no individuals can fix this, right, just by our own decisions, but we do have an important role to play. I think, there's a few simple things to do. One, I'd say 3 things, if I had to boil it down most simply. I think from a like your own footprint standpoint, red meat consumption is the biggest driver of emissions in our food system by a lot. It's sort of the biggest thing. And I say that as a meat eater. I'm a former chef. I love meat. I still eat it, but I've reduced significantly the amount. I think that's something that all of us can do. Even just cutting it out like once a week than what you normally do would be a meaningful impact if everybody did that. 2, I think brands that are starting to promote more regenerative or sustainable food products, we should support them. I know there's plenty of greenwashing out there, but if the big companies see that when they market products in that way, that people will buy them, that is a very strong signal that we care about that. Then it will be up to the advocates to hold these companies accountable to make sure they're doing what they say they're doing. But from a purchase standpoint, that is a really powerful signal that right now, frankly, we're not sending as a country on whole. And third, vote. There's literally nothing more important than us voting for people who believe in science, who believe in climate change, who care about our kids' future and what we hand down to them. I don't care if it's a Republican who cares about these things, great. I'm all for it. In fact, frankly, we need more than anything Republicans who stand up for basic science and believe in climate change, which, by the way, the party did. Reagan and Bush all totally accepted this science. It's been a very strange, pretty recent change. We need to restore that. And so whoever your party is, voting for people who prioritize this is critical.
Sam Kass, thank you so much for talking to us.
Such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.